So in the last video we watched as Jesus, this good news king, is brutally beaten and mocked and in the end crucified on a Roman cross. And as we watch this dark story, we're left scratching our heads wondering, why? Why did this happen? How is it that this man who healed and who loved and who blessed and who served, why is it that the crowd, even his closest friends, I mean the whole gang of them, why is it that they would have turned into such a dark and angry mob? Well, let me take you back to the very beginning of the series. Remember, from the very beginning, we've traced this line throughout each of these teachings that we've been confronted over and over again with the state of our human condition, right? How, on the one hand, we have been created from the very beginning fundamentally as good, even very good. This was the pronouncement of God over his creation. And yet at the same time, there exists within us this marring and this reality that lures us toward evil. There are both of these realities present within us. We scratch our heads in disbelief over our propensity toward evil, and especially towards what's happened in this story. But a story in our recent history, as Western civilization anyways, reminds us of how prone we actually are to this kind of evil. You all know this story. How in the late 1930s there arose a man in Europe of all places, civilized Europe. There arose a man in Europe with these very evil ideas and ideologies. But rather than the country rejecting those ideas, instead the truth got twisted and the country of people began to rally around him in support. And they weren't crazy people. In the end, what occurred was this nation of otherwise normal housewives and factory workers and doctors and farmers and nurses, these kinds of people, in the end, either implicitly or complicitly, they joined together with this man and his ideologies to participate in really the greatest genocide that our world has ever seen, and into propagating a war that resulted in the death of over 75 million men, women, and children. And this wasn't that long ago. The reality of evil is so present in our lives in grand ways like that, but also in small ways. And the truth is that the mob that turned on Jesus in that day 2,000 years ago was no different than the mob that arose in Europe 75 years ago. It was marred people, just like you and just like I. And it was for this very condition that last video was saying to us that Jesus died. Jesus came to meet our angry mob. He came to meet us in the midst of our evil. He came to rescue us out of this evil and to invite us into a different way of living and being. But the rescue mission of God in Jesus was going to mean that Jesus himself, as God, was going to also experience this evil. The snake was going to bite him too. Well, in today's video now, we watch the dramatic next events, what happens after that day. Because while evil does indeed come upon Jesus, the story then goes on to describe the most amazing things, that 3 days later, Jesus was going to rise again. And in his rising, he was going to announce victoriously that he, the king from God, had overcome, that the snake and the snake's power had been undone by him. The power of death, the power of evil had been overcome by the power of life. And that right there, in a nutshell, that is the story of Jesus. The power of death being overcome by the power of life. That's the story of Jesus. In our world, we see, right? We see death all around us, death in our bodies. We see death in our hearts. We see death in our structures. We see death in our corporations. We see death in our environment. We see death in our governments. And in coming, Jesus too tasted the fullness of that death. In many ways, Jesus tasted death in a manner that you and I never will. But in King Jesus, death does not get the final say. Instead, the resurrection is there to teach us that Jesus, God with skin on, has overcome death in his life. Jesus announces to creation that he is the resurrection and the life. Jesus overcomes. And here's the secret. How is it that we receive this life, this overcoming life? Well, we go back again and again to the story of the boy who went away. We come home. We come home to God and we say, God, I want that life. I want your resurrection life. I want you to begin to overcome the death and the darkness in me, that I could live a new way, that I could be a new way, that I could have healing and hope and joy and love. That's how we come home. And with that, let's watch the next video.